Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
It's the Skeptic Zone Podcast, episode number 702 for the 20th of March, 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia. Coming up at the top of the show, I speak to Arjun Nidigalu, who came to my attention just recently as he's produced a series on YouTube called Vulture Watch. No, he does not watch vultures. Well, maybe he does in a way of speaking. He looks at pseudoscience, specifically things like crazy devices that are supposed to tune your aura or something like that, and homeopathy, anti-vaxxers. I looked at some of the videos over at Vulture Watch and I learned quite a bit about a device called the Healy, which I don't think really does any healing at all. Well, maybe it does. Do you want your aura tuned up? Is your aura out of tune? What tune does your aura play? Did you know that bacteria sing songs? And joining me now on the line, all the way from beautiful Sydney, Australia, how about that? It's somebody who I've only just discovered recently, fascinating bloke, an interesting backlog of work already online, which we'll get to in a minute. It's Arjun Nidigalu. Hello, Arjun.
Hey, Richard. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Good to see you. Not a problem, good to see you. Obviously, these days we like everybody else, we're relying on video conferencing and all that sort of stuff. We can actually see each other face to face, which is a really good thing. Now, you've been brought to my attention by I imagine our mutual friend, Loretta Marron from Friends of Science and Medicine, who has been a guest on the podcast many times before. And she said, look, check out this guy's videos. I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'll have a look. Good recommendation. And wow, what an interesting series you've got up so far. You call your YouTube channel Vulture Watch, which is quite interesting. But before we get into that, what's your background and what's your interest in, dare I say, skepticism?
Yeah, I think skepticism's been a bit of a saviour for me. Back when I was quite a religious person, I was quite pseudoscientific myself not too long ago. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a bit of making up for me to do from that perspective. So about myself, look, I arrived in Australia as an immigrant when I was 11 years old with my family. Barely could speak a word of English, but had to learn from scratch. And so I was interested in mathematics and science growing up. I eventually studied engineering and now work as a product manager at an automotive company. So I did spend a good 10 years tutoring high school mathematics and physics, which taught me how to communicate ideas effectively. But like I said, through most of that time, I was quite religiously inclined. I was a practicing Hindu, a polytheist, made many pilgrimages to India, convinced I was destined to become a monk of some sort.
Oh, wow.
So I practiced meditation, learned Sanskrit, read all the major books, the holy books, but the more I read, the less convinced I was. And luckily I didn't get suckered into like a sunk cost fallacy, and literally over a period of 6 to 12 months, I basically renounced all of that and became more of a rationalist, if you will.
Wow.
So yeah, skepticism was my saviour in that sense.
That's interesting, and of course this is a story that is not unknown.
Yes.
Some people follow a very similar path to you, being brought up in one religion or another, or one set of beliefs or another, and discover skepticism. It's oddly like, in my situation, being brought up believing in UFOs and monsters, because when I was a little kid, that's what I really thought they were real.
Yes.
But as I was getting older, coming to the realization that, oh, hang on a second, that's not the full story. Anyway, so you've had this interest, and it's obviously had a big effect on you, but you've done something about it. You've actually, I would like to say, in a sense, put pen to paper. What I mean is you've got in front of the camera and you've started this Vulture Watch. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Vulture Watch is basically my personal venting chamber, I suppose, for all the pseudoscience that goes on, and I wanted to make it a systematic way in which I debunk claims that are made without any evidence. So the way it started was actually quite a funny story. So a mate of mine took me out to dinner with another friend who I wasn't so aware of, but she happened to be someone who studied psychology, and she made a claim at that dinner to say that prayer was more effective than therapy for depression, which I thought was a pretty bold claim, especially from someone who studied psychology. And so she was kind of mouthing off studies that proved it, et cetera, and the more I argued against her, the more I realized how difficult it was to kind of, provide evidence against it. She was kind of using her position as someone who's had the education, and my friend was more or less convinced at the end of that dinner that, prayer is, very useful. I went home really frustrated, thinking, how could I have argued that better? How could I have asked more pointed questions? And so, yeah, that's how it started. And months later, I came across a video by Jaggi Vasudev, who's like a cult leader, for lack of a better term, and Deepak Chopra, another cult leader, one might say. So they claimed that, vaccines were ineffective, and that, eliminating the COVID-19 virus may not be the best idea or the best solution for humanity. So that really ticked me off, and so that was my first video where I just jotted down everything they said, and I had counter arguments with evidence and references and things like that. And once that video came out, the next few kind of propped up as things that I was triggered by various people or social media posts, and we're only 4 videos in now, but it's only been a few months as well. So yeah.
And I noticed your videos get a lot of comment, which is really good. Let's get back to something you just said. You mentioned the name Deepak, and I was looking at one of your videos the other day, and I had to have a laugh because you talk about the Deepak Chopra Zone.
Yes.
What do you mean by the Deepak Chopra Zone? Not the Skeptic Zone, folks, but the Deepak Chopra Zone.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's a very big zone. I feel it's the significant population falls under it. Basically, anyone who understands sciencey words at a bare minimum level, so they can kind of recognize approximately what it means, but don't really know what they mean. Things like quantum or frequencies or so that's kind of the Deepak Zone. They've had kind of high school education or even primary school education. They can recognize the words and they feel like they're sciencey and credible in some way, but they don't really know what it entails. So that's what I call the Deepak Zone, and it's a huge market. It's where a lot of these pseudoscientific things are sold. And
I like it. I'm glad somebody's put a name to that, because skeptics have been aware of this concept for a very long time. The sort of people who will listen to something, the expression word salad.
Yes.
Just putting frequencies, vibration, quantum, all together. And we've seen this for a long time. So the Deepak Zone, I do like that. But let's talk about one of the videos that I found very interesting. Now, you've done a video on the Healy product.
Yes.
And which is, I've seen some of the original videos of the people spruiking this device, and I saw your video. For people who have never heard of Healy, what is it exactly?
So Healy is an app, and it's also a device. So it was developed by a gentleman called Markus Schmeeker in Germany. So he postulates that we all have a bioenergetic field around us. Some of us call it an aura, and apparently we're all part of a quantum information field that kind of permeates the whole universe. So he's figured out a way of hacking this field, which means that you can put in your photo, for example, Richard, into this app, and it'll measure your aura through no connection to your body. And it'll figure out what's going on with your body. It'll figure out if your chakras are aligned, if you have energetic blocks. and then it'll pump out some frequencies in the form of microcurrents through your body to realign you and harmonize you into your field.
Wow.
Yeah, so
all this from an app.
Yeah,
on your phone,
an app
and
a little
right?
device that pumps out microcurrents. Yes. So they've been the thing about this Healy device though is they've been supremely clever in finding the loopholes in the regulations to make sure that they can sell the product effectively. And so with this video, I just wanted to bring a bit more awareness. And I was honestly shocked at how little criticism this thing had. I mean, it's an FDA cleared product. It's something that is on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So I'm surprised more people don't have an issue with it, especially given that it costs upwards of $2,000 all the way up to about $6,000 to get one of these things.
Oh, it's an old story. I mean, over the years, I've been doing this over 20 years.
Yeah.
I've come across so many products where you look at it and you scratch your head and say, well, how on earth can this be have any form of government sanction whatsoever? But we see it again and again, which is really sad.
Yeah, it is.
One of the things that really made me laugh again watching your video was, and maybe you can explain this because it really needs explaining, what are the songs of bacteria?
So Taryn Lee, who claims to have brought Healy to Australia, she's one of the pioneers who brought it to Australia. So she put out a video explaining to normal folk, how we say, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. I suppose that's what she's done. And she's explaining how bacterial infections in your body have a certain frequency because, everything is frequency, everything is energy. So she's saying that this bacteria is singing a song that the Healy is able to pick up through the information field that we talked about before, and it's able to send a song back to get rid of that bacteria, is exactly what she says. So songs of bacteria became a bit of a funny tag for me to try and capitalize on for the video. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
But it does almost sound like an album by some pop group, doesn't it?
Right.
Songs of bacteria.
Yeah.
Music to listen to while you're in hospital. Maybe you're of the same mind as me. And I did spend time to look at some of the videos of the people, selling this device. Mm-hmm. And then they're in their backyard or in their house and they're holding it up to the camera. Do you think these people are permanently living in the Deepak zone? In other words, it appears to me that a lot of these people are convinced this is real science or real technology.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is driven by conspiracies around the medical mafia, or the video's only been up a few days now, but you can already see in the comments the kind of things people are saying. I've been accused of being part of the conventional medical mafia.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where a lot of it comes from, and because they're desperately looking for alternative ways of looking at things, that they get suckered into these kind of things, and yeah, they, like you said, that a lot of these people are permanently stuck in that Deepak zone, and part of my efforts with Vulture Watch is to try and give them the awareness, give them a chance to kind of get out of there like I did many years ago.
Now, another video in your series so far deals with a subject that I've been looking at for decades now. I've had many adventures with this subject, which is homeopathy, of course, but you take a very strong stand in your video and you look specifically at the influence homeopathy has in India, especially with the Indian government.
Yeah, I was quite shocked when I started making that video. It was purely driven by my, I suppose, lifelong frustration with this, because many of my closest family and friends believe in this. And a lot of my family back in India certainly have wasted, thousands, if not, millions of rupees on these medications and consultations. So the Indian government part of it wasn't originally part of the plan, but that I had to include it in the end if I was to be diligent. And basically, the Indian government have set up a whole department, a whole ministry, in fact, for alternative medical therapies. I was shocked to see how much funding was provided for homeopaths. I was shocked to see how it was legitimized even on their official website. So if you can imagine going to a government website and finding a cure for something as serious as dengue fever, as a homeopathic medication with absolutely no supporting evidence. I mean, that's how serious it is. And so I had to cover that. Got a lot of flack from it, both from within the family, a lot of Modi supporters in the family, and also on social media. But I think it's important to recognise that when the government supports something like this, it just further legitimizes and empowers that pseudoscientific mindset that people have. It's terrible what they've done during the COVID crisis. They were spruiking all these homeopathic medications that boost your immunity, and they made a fortune out of it. And the government was literally, you had ministers coming out, advocating this kind of thing. So it was a terrible situation. So I thought it deserved to be exposed.
It is a terrible situation, and of course you referred to the Indian Prime Minister, who you reference quite a lot in your video. Folks, I'm going to link to Vulture Watch in this week's show notes, but if you go to YouTube and you type in Vulture Watch, you'll probably find it anyway, but please have a look at the link. Now, I getting back to the Healy one, I was quite impressed by it, and I learned quite a lot because I knew little of the product. Although I've seen similar things like this before over the years, quantum and auras and zapping, and it's nothing too new. It's a continuing disappointment to us. I'm sure you realise that the government aren't more diligent in cracking down on this utter nonsense. Are you at all worried about the Healy company coming down on you and trying to gag you in any way?
Yeah, I think I've purposefully shared the video to a number of Healy associates just to try and get a feel of what they'd say, and it's funny that there was about 3 or 4 already in the comments, and basically they haven't offered any counter argument to what I've presented, but they're basically saying you haven't tried the Healy, so you don't know what you're talking about, or like I said before, you're part of the medical mafia. And I think that's the kind of thing I'll get, but also from a defamation perspective, I take a bit of care with my videos. I do consult, a small legal team just to try and understand what my boundaries are and what I can say and can't say. For example, Christian Halper, the investor behind Healy, who claims to be a multi-billionaire, I can't come out of my video and say he's not, because I can't provide evidence for that. So I've got to be careful around things like that. But apart from that, I think we're going to get Healy reacting to this video, because there hasn't been anything out there, at least that I'm aware of, that has been so comprehensive in terms of dismantling their whole narrative. We'll have to wait and see.
We will keep an eye on that with great interest. Folks, I can't recommend these videos enough. They're really worth a look. I mean, if nothing else, you'll learn about one quack product in particular, the Healy device, and how outrageously silly to our point of view. Because, when you have a little bit of science background and you've seen these things come and go over the years, you realize just how silly these devices are. Tune up your auras with an iPhone. It basically boils down to something like that.
Exactly.
It's just incredible. It's just incredible. Well, Arjun, thank you so much for sparing some time for the Skeptic Zone. Folks, again, have a look at those videos, and we'll try to catch up with you a bit down the track. Maybe when you have another video or 2 online, we can talk about it.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Richard. It's been an honor, and I've followed your work over the years, particularly since COVID, and I think you provide a great source of rational knowledge, entertainment, all in one package. So good on you, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, you'll be definitely back again. Absolutely. But for now, Arjun Nidigalu, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.